let's talk about enabling. So let's say you are somebody who loves or cares about an alcoholic or an addict, one that is actively using or drinking, or they play some role in your life. I mean, this could range from your partner to one of your children to one of your parents to a coworker you've been with for a while, or one of your bandmates, good friend, whatever. And you want to be handling things the right way. You're not sure how to go about it, or just how to kind of be with them in this sense. Because one of the things that comes up the most, what people fear that they're doing, is enabling. You hear that's a phrase you hear a lot in terms of like relationships and addiction, or addiction in the family, is like you're enabling them, you're enabling their drinking and using, or you're being an enabler or whatnot. And I think what comes to most people's mind, especially people that maybe aren't as well versed in how addiction works or the little dynamics of it, is usually it's like giving them money, or you're helping or aiding them in some way, like aiding and abetting. You're giving them resources that helps them be able to drink or use, or to continue drinking or using. Or some people think about like whether it's occurring in the household or at work, whatever the situation may be, where you're just kind of like looking the other way. Hear no evil, see no evil. You're not saying anything, or maybe it's approval in some sort of sense, or maybe honestly, they're one of your friends or something, and you drink and occasionally use drugs with them, and you're just like, whatever, that's their deal. But now you don't want to contribute to their self-destruction. And I think those are all forms of enabling, but I say that's usually what comes to people's mind, because there are other ways I think that occur way more often, in ways we don't think about. Because I think most forms of enabling doesn't actually have to do with the acquiring or resources for drugs and alcohol, but rather the consequences. Like, I think one of the ways that people enable the most is in whatever way they do it, whether it's like, parents letting their kids stay at a certain place, even though they know they're not living well or whatnot, or whether it's, a spouse that bails somebody out of jail, or, if you help a buddy out of some situation that has nothing to do with drugs and alcohol, but it's helping them essentially avoid the consequences they were going to feel if you did not help them. And this is like an incredibly complex and delicate and difficult situation, because a lot of people in this sense are like, what, maybe I'm obligated to share this household with them, and they may be kind of in this like spiral or something, but right now they're still helping raise the kids, and they're going to work and supporting me. I can't just like cut them off from stuff. Or in a lot of sense, and this is one that is like kind of the most intense, is the idea of like, it may be easy for you to say, just like, let them have it. Like, let them, tough love and all that stuff. But look, I have a young daughter that's addicted to drugs, and I mean, I don't like that she does it, but I'm not sending her out to the wolves, man. Or, it could be whatever your child is, or whatever your friend or sibling or something. Like, I'm not kicking them out to the streets. I don't know what's going to happen out there. Or I'm not going to leave them to their own devices as far as like committing crimes and them starting to rack up charges and go to jail, maybe even prison. Like, I don't, what they consider they're doing is not enabling, but just a form of like harm reduction. And, I think there is truly just no like set in stone right answer for this, because a lot of people, they were doing stuff like that. Like, I'm not going to let them like die, for instance. I'm not going to, let them like utterly collapse in a death spiral. They would be shocked and maybe offended too that like, a lot of therapists or drug and alcohol counselors would be like, well, you're enabling them, because they're supposed to feel all those consequences. They need to experience all those things. It's the idea that people need to hit rock bottom, whatever that looks like. Because that's usually the impetus to change. And like, the idea that people won't change unless they have to, and you have to make sure that they have to. You can't give them shelter, you can't even give them like food or something, and not even in the sense of like, well, they say they're going to buy food with the money you give them, but then you realize it might be for drugs, but actually even just feeding and housing them for a small amount of time. And that could be so brutal, especially parents to do that to their children, or anybody that they love and care about. Like, I can't say that this is my role. Like, I'm supposed to help them, especially in the hardest of times, or, if it's your partner, so let's do his part sort of deal. And, it's not this idea that it's completely abandoning them, but sometimes in order to not enable them, it sounds like completely abandoning them. Because, some people would argue that they need to feel that consequence too. As harsh as it sounds, to be abandoned, to know what they're losing in a sense. And it's it's a very sensitive subject, because there are many cases where somebody was on that path of self-destruction, and then they were cut off from everything, and then they did something irreversible, something that sent them to prison or killed them or what have you, just wreck their lives in a way that they cannot repair. And then the person, and this is what feeds it, especially like what people would consider enabling, is the guilt they feel. Like, oh my God, if I just I let my child to the streets, and this horrible thing that happened to them wouldn't have happened if I just would have let them stay. I wasn't giving them drugs or alcohol. How could I be so cruel? And here's just God, the brutality and cruelty of addiction, because it turns good people, or it turns your average human into doing stuff like this, where, I'm not gonna lie, a lot of alcoholics and addicts, and yours truly, will sometimes, whether they even do it consciously or not, use that against the person. Like, in this, again, brutal, awful way, use their love for them against them, use their care for their own life. Like, there's a lot of cases where it's like other people care about their life more than they do. And they're like, fine, I'll use that for a place to crash, or I'll use that to kind of keep this thing going, and I think if you're looking for suggestions of what to do, a lot of people say that, you can help them out as long as it's under the assumption, or not just assumption, actually, as long as it's under the guarantee that they're seeking some form of treatment. Like, you may do this if you do this. And as soon as you stop doing that, as soon as, whether it's just straight up being sober, or whether it's participating in some form of treatment, as soon as you stop doing that, we're out. I'm out, whoever it may be. And, I think about this a lot, because there is also, as an alcoholic, an addict, we can enable each other too. Like, people in recovery, there's a lot of times where you want to help the person that is still out there struggling, that you care about, and intimately how awful it is. Or there's a person that maybe keeps relapsing, like something I've done, and you're helping them get back up. And at this certain point, it's this question, this debate of like, do they need to just kind of do this on their own? Is this approval in a way? Like, I'll tell you something, where one of the things that I've learned, as a person who's done it, and a person where, I don't want to say done too, but in relationships, in like the significant other relationship, sometimes enabling is simply just staying with them, like still being with them. Because, something again, very personally, I've thought in my own mind is that, like, my life's a disaster, my life sucks, but at least this person still loves me, or this person's still with me. And then to lose that, here's the tricky part, could send me on an absolute death spiral. Certainly may feel like that in my mind. If I don't have her, now I truly have nothing. So what's the point, right? Or it could be the wake-up call. I never thought I'd lose this, and now I did. What else? I could lose my own life, honestly. Or I could lose my sanity. Like, who knows how low the rock bottom goes. And it's strange to people to think that. Like, I want to love and support them. And again, there's not really any just this correct answer that you can just pass out. Like, you do this. It's sometimes you need them in your life for some reason or another. And it's not as simple as just like, I need to cut them off. But I just, what this kind of little video is about is to just kind of keep these things in mind about, this is not just about giving them a place to stay, to drink and use, because it's safer here, kind of like whatever the parents in the high school that was like, you guys can drink over here as long as you give us the keys and don't get too crazy or whatever, or you're giving them money, you're bailing them out, quite literally bailing them out of jail. But other things as simple as like still having a relationship with them, when maybe, and again, this is something I'm truly asking, who's to say, like, maybe they need to not have these things in their life anymore. Maybe they need to truly feel these consequences. I don't know, but it's something to keep in mind. So anyways, very super bleak subject, but real. If you like this channel, subscribe. If you don't, that's too bad. Other than that, be well.